6:30. The number one thing is to call the meeting to order. So welcome to the Monday, March the 7th meeting of the Committee of the Whole, Community Development Committee. The second item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. There are a couple of amendments to the agenda that I need to move over in a second or for. There's been an addition of a closed session that will be personnel matters of an identifiable individual and proposed pending acquisition, job site challenge. So with those two amendments, I need a mover and seconder. So we would move that. Moved by Councillor Hunter. I'll second that. Seconded by Councillor Cameron. All in favor of the approval of the amendment? Unanimous. Good. Number 3 is disclosure of pecuniary interest or the general nature thereof. Does anyone have any disclosures to make tonight? Connor, I think you did. Did you fill out the necessary paperwork? Yes. Good. So you'll be stepping away for 6A1. 6A1. Thanks, Connor. Sorry, Rebecca.
Sorry, through the chair, all committee members actually have to declare in public what the conflict is.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that.
That's okay.
That is so.
Yes, the applicants are direct family members.
Thank you. Thanks for the
Applicants were
6A1.
6A1.
Yeah, 6A1. The applicants are direct family members.
I have a declaration as well. Or a disclosure, I should say.
Okay.
So I haven't filled out the paperwork. I will at the end of the meeting. So I have a pecuniary interest. I don't know whether it's direct or indirect, and I don't really know the extent of it because I haven't heard the presentation yet. But it has to do with the delegation and the presentation we'll have concerning the draft new zoning bylaw. And in my package, I had a series of slides, but I'm not really sure of the purpose of the slides. There didn't seem to be a briefing note that outlined the purpose of the presentation. But I can surmise from the slides that I see, I can surmise what the purpose is. So the general nature of my disclosure is that I live in the area that will be under discussion there. And the results of that presentation and the ensuing discussion may or may not affect property values in that area, which my interest may or may not be in common with other residents of the area. So I need legal advice on this. And I will appeal to the Integrity Commissioner for a ruling. But as far as tonight's meeting is concerned, it is a committee meeting. I don't intend to leave my desk, but I will not, I don't think I'll participate in the discussion. It's a potential perceived pecuniary interest, and I'm not at all sure that it exists, but I will err on the caution side. Thank you very much, and I will disclose all of that in the statement that I filed with the clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So okay. So for the delegation, you're going to stay at the table but not contribute.
Minimally.
I live in a rural zone and I'm going to comment on all rural matters, so or residential matters. So anyway, are there any other disclosures of interest or any issues there? Hearing none. Moving on to number 4, which is business arising from the previous meeting minutes. Does anyone have any issues to bring forth from the meeting minutes? No hands. All right, so then we're on to number 5, which I will welcome for the comments on the zoning bylaw review, Suzanne Zarella and Peter Davies. Welcome, Peter and Suzanne. Peter will try to keep it, I'll set the timer for 15. We'll keep it roughly 250, if that's at all possible. I know we're gonna go over quite possibly with some questions. And then giving you the opportunity to give answers to any questions that the members of the committee might have. Okay, Peter?
Thank you very much. Now, share my screen. Okay,
I won't start until you start, okay?
yeah, thank you. Okay, Mr. Chair, Mr. Mayor, and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity for speaking to you today. As mentioned, my name is Peter Davies. My wife Suzanne and I are interested in this topic because we live in the RLS zone, although our interest is more academic than otherwise because most development of our property is already finished. With respect to the mayor, I'm hoping that this is not a conflict. The maps that I've used in there were meant as examples, as you will see, but if they are, and they present some challenge for you, I regret that immensely, and but we will move on. The basic issue is that we have some fundamental parts about this, the zoning bylaw, particularly relates to RLS, that we do not understand. We raised a number of issues during the first draft, and a number of those things were discussed, and this committee has dealt with them and made decisions on things such as lot coverage, side yard setback, etc. But we think we have some more fundamental issues about the RLF zone, principally how it is defined and what it is intended to achieve. So this briefing is to cover those areas. The first issue I'd like to ask is the rationale, is that to mention is that the rationale for the RLS zone remains unclear. Because of this lack of clarity, assigning property to the zone, it appears to be a challenge. Oh, I will point out that the 48-7 slides that you see on that presentation, I'm not going to present all of them because they would not fit into 15 minutes. So there are some changes. If there are changes to the slides that you have, you will see a new slide, a revised slide marker up in this corner of the slide. However, assigning zones to the property seems to be problematic, and the reasons for particular zoning provisions are unclear, at least to us. Okay. The intent of the RLS zone has never been particularly clear from our perspective in all that I've read. I still do not really understand what the objective of the zone is and how the provisions and other restrictions supporting those objectives are created. Currently, the best definition of the RLS zone is in section 6.4 of the zoning bylaw. It states that there is no intent by council to maintain roads in an RLS area. Other municipal services may not be available or restricted. There's no intent by council to upgrade the levels of service. This would indicate that there's a relationship between limited services residential or RLS and private roads. Although, as we'll see, this is not particularly clear. The RLS, the zones are obviously for the RLS are all in Annex D to the current bylaw, and they comprise the properties along the waterfront between Johnstown and Cardinal. Right now, in the zoning, there are approximately 304 lots or properties that are in the zone. Sorry, I lost my page. And the current zoning lacks a strong link between private roads and the RLS zone, because many of the properties have direct access to a public road, namely CR2 or some of the other public roads in the area. The first draft of the revised bylaw developed reallocated these properties, 148 to RU and 155 to RLS. You'll note that that total only comes up to 303, not 304. That's because one of the formal RLS properties has become commercial highway. But again, this provided a better link between the RLS and private roads, but there were still some inconsistencies. The draft that will be presented tonight as part of your package has further refined what the RLS, where the RLS properties are. They remove 20 property, it removes 20 properties from the RLS to give a total of 135 and adds 20 to 168. It's not a complete one-for-one exchange. There have been some modifications along the line. The additional RUs are shown in blue on the slide. The problem with this reorganization is that it puts all of the RLS lots on the waterfront, and all of them are on private roads. However, it does not solve the issue as to whether all lots on private roads should be RLS, because as we'll see, there could be issues where lots are on private roads but are not included in the current thing. It appears that the criteria for RLS in this case is that they are both on private roads and on the waterfront. Now I'd like to discuss some of the issues with this zoning. As I mentioned, that the intent of the new RLS zone is not mentioned in either of the new revised drafts, and the note linking it to private roads has been removed. In comments provided by the Novatech representatives at the 1 November meeting, they stated that the intent of the RLS zone is to identify land parcels where access is provided by private roads and to establish zoning provisions that would apply. There are two areas of focus associated with this. One is the access by private roads, and the other one is special zoning provisions. Private road definition is covered in the official plan. Section 5.3.16 defines private roads as right of ways which provides access to 2 or more properties. But then those right of ways have not been assumed by the township. Section 5.3.17 further states that creation of new private roads will not be permitted in the township, but the establishment of a right of way that provides shared driveway access for 2 abutting properties, each of which has frontage on a private road, public road, shall not constitute the creation of a private road. Now let's take an example here. If we get these 2 properties, A and B, for these things, I'm going to give some sample zoning. And then for this, I've just assumed that RLS refers to anything on a private road, recognizing we still don't really know the definition. Both of these properties share a right of way, are abutting each other, and are on a private road. So there are basically 2 ways of interpreting the official plan. One is that this is a revised slide from what was on there. The one way of interpreting it is that shared driveways are not private roads, and that the property could be zoned as RU. However, clearly another interpretation is that the exclusion of creating new roads with shared access right of ways for 2 abutting properties is simply an exception to the ban on new private road creations, but still results in the shared right of way being a private road. In this case, they should be zoned RLS. Again, it's unclear as to exactly how that applies. We assume that if the driveway was shaped differently, that the complexity of what these zones are would remain. And what if property C is added to the mix? Obviously, it is not on a public road, and it is abutting other properties, but it's off a right of way. So it is obviously RLS, but do the other 2 change? Do they become something other than what they would have been had they just been together? Now, the reason why we oh, part of this becomes, I'm sorry, when would it, if a driveway connecting two businesses is in fact not a private road, when would it become a private road should property C be attached? Now, originally in the, I thought we had a conflict because in the original draft from last May, this showed us on Belly Mead 3 properties, A, B, and C. Now, A and B in this case are both zoned RLS. However, and at the same time, in the same draft, in this configuration of properties that are on County Road 2, property A, which is in front, was zoned RU, while properties B and C were zoned RLS. Now, the most recent draft, the one that you received on Friday, has changed the configuration a bit so that now A and B are now listed as being RU. But this still does not explain whether or not the road that A and B access from is or is not a private road. Another example could be these 3 properties together. All are on right of way, all abut each other, and all are on private roads. But is property C an RLS or is it an RU? In the first draft, we had examples where this configuration exists in the township, and one of the 3 was RLS, and 2 of them were RU. But is the T configuration different, etc. for this? It's not clear. And the only reason I think this is important is given the restrictions that are being applied to uses on private roads, I think it's going to become important as people start applying for things such as operating a bed and breakfast or having a second dwelling, etc. Okay. Special zoning provisions. Again, sorry, I'm referring to your notes because I found them as the best place to find examples of what the intent of all this zoning actually is. You've described the intent of these special zoning provisions that were to put on these RLS lots as follows. The focus here is on small lots or lots that are smaller and that are adjacent to natural features or the river. So my question is, does this only apply to properties that are on private roads? I'd like to do a quick comparison of properties using lot size and location. I've collected data using the Legion Grenville Property Lookout, where you can measure area and frontage, and we created a database and put that data in. Here we take a representative section of the property. Again, all of the examples I have here are just representative. There was no particular interest in any of these properties. As we have taken each of the properties and put their area into area groupings, they're in a range of areas. As this property builds, you can see how the various areas groupings spread in this particular one. There are 7 groupings, 5 of which are considered here. If I plot the zoning on top of that, you can see that both the RLS and the RU lots share a wide range of areas of different property sizes. If I throw in the new zoning for the latest draft, there's a bit of a change, but it doesn't really change the basic principle that there's not much difference in terms of size distribution for RU and RLS lots. In fact, if you take the distribution, the percentages of lots in each distribution category ranging from less than a quarter of a hectare up to greater than 1 hectare, you'll notice that the majority of lots in both sides, RU, the proposed RU and RLS lots are less than half an acre. And a significant number are less than a quarter of an acre. So what about water frontage? The average water frontage for RU lots, and this again is based upon the definition that it's in the second of the latest draft and those properties south of CR2 between Cardinal and Johnstown, is the average water frontage is 51.1 meters. The RLS lots are 32.8 meters on average length. Now, there is a difference, but that difference only occurs in the bigger lots. It is primarily the result of the fact that there are 7 very large rural lots that have significant. Is that my
So
timer?
that's your timer, but
Okay, sorry.
I have no problem with, I'm gonna add 3 more minutes to it to
Okay.
allow you
I will have
to
I'm gonna
draw
have-
yourself to the conclusion, okay?
Right, okay.
Okay.
So the same thing with shoreline. They're equivalent in terms of share of the shoreline. They're also equivalent in terms of their representation on national heritage features. There's equal numbers of abutting and not abutting. So if small lots and adjacent and those adjacent to water and national heritage require are not unique to the lots on private roads, and such lots require special zoning provisions, then these provisions should be applied to many zones through the township. I believe that we do not need to create multiple zones for this. There are numerous standard or general terms that deal with waterfront and national heritage protection, shoreline occupancy, water frontage and setbacks. What about overdevelopment on small lots? I have a whole bunch of slides, which I can't get into, that look at development density, lot coverage, and setback. In none of these cases, and I'd be happy to answer questions on them, in none of these cases do I believe that there is an issue with small lots. The current problem with small lots along the waterfront, that means that we must pick out a particular bunch of them to say, okay, you have special development requirements. I won't go into development density. But yes, one of the areas that might be concerned with small lots is starter castles or large properties. The thing I want to point out here is that the development on a property is basically controlled by the septic system. The maximum floor, the septic system limits maximum floor area, and the maximum septic capacity is set by property size and location. Therefore, smaller properties, the smaller the septic, the smaller the residence. And that applies to almost every use you wish to do. If you talk about second dwellings, if you dwelling units, if you can't cover the septic, if you can't create a property enough room space, then you can't have a second dwelling unit, no matter how much you may want it. So that becomes, to my mind, a principal limit on the development. As a result of that, and my logic disappeared, of course, I was recommending that we retain 20% lot coverage. So in the time I don't have available, I would just like to finish with one thing. We have seen, there was a comment we raised that we thought that going from 3 meters to 6 meters in side yard, interior side yard setback was unjustified for RLS lots because a lot of them are tiny. And in their comments, Novatech agreed and said, yes, many of them are narrow, and we recommend that the 3 yard could be a good thing. This committee looked at that and said, yes, we agree as well. So as a result, the 3 meter setback is set in. But this means we have taken extant lots, the conditions that apply to them, and applied it to zoning restrict regulations, which as I understand it, are meant to. Sorry. Okay.
Good. Thank you, Peter. You certainly used all of 50 minutes and you did a fantastic presentation. So thank you for getting through it. The members have certainly had the slides and the comments from the November, all of the November 2nd package in November. So they've certainly read through a lot of the comments that you have. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor to committee members. If they have questions for Peter, or if they want clarification on any of the examples that he's raised. So I'm going to start with you, Greg.
Thank you. It was a great presentation, and unfortunately, time was your enemy on this. I guess
By
my,
organization.
no. Giving a presentation is an art, and so I found it I read the package on the weekend, and I guess and I'll use the word concern, but I don't know if it's a proper word. But is it concerned with the private road aspect of it in general, or is it the concern that it's just going to and it should apply throughout?
It's, my concern is that there has been no clarification of what RLS is supposed to do. As I said, the private roads and linking private roads in RLS was what was assumed, but no evidence has ever shown that to be the case. It appears that RLS was created to try to defend the waterfront, because they were applied across much of the waterfront. And so there's this aspect of, we've got to look after the natural environment, we've got to protect the shoreline, we've got to protect the natural nature of it, and we're doing this by focusing on tiny lots along the waterfront. But RLS is not that. So I don't, the private road issue is important to me, because I think the whole issue of why private roads have use restrictions on it is an issue for another day. But it is important, but I could see RLS could mean almost anything according to what's in the current definition. And we don't know what private roads are either, at least I don't, and perhaps I'm missing something fundamental.
Okay, thank you. But again, great presentation, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Ward?
Yeah, I echo I put presentation together myself, and I can echo the work you did, that's for sure. And I think unfortunately it was hard to get it all, but it was and I sort of and sort of the same opinion that Mr. Modler is I always like to simplify it to what is the ask, and it sounds like the ask is to try and clarify the intent of the RLS system itself. Do you get that, Drew?
My yes, exactly, to clarify the intent of the RLS and to explain why it is important. Because we get the zone set up, said, well, we got it, here it is, here are the restrictions, but it's really hard to judge why those things are important.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and fair enough. And and I think obviously you have to get the first answer for getting the second answer. So okay, no, that's what I have for now, anyways.
Suzanne, if you have a comment?
I do. I'm Suzanne. I'm the invisible half of the team. And in answer to both of your questions, I'd like to add one thing that Peter hasn't really mentioned. We question the difference between RLS and RU zones, given that they are in fact so equivalent in so many ways. They're all along waterfronts. They have essentially the same size of lots, the same amount of water frontage. Many are accessed by private roads, many are not. But what difference does that actually make to the present preservation of the waterfront, to the requirement that RLS has more severe restrictions than RU? Given that the lots are equivalent, given that very often RU lots are directly next door to RLS lots, why should the RU lot have a different set of building requirements from the RLS lot? Why should I, on the RLS lot, have a 10% lot coverage when that one right there that's 15 feet from me has 20% coverage? So that is one of the questions, is why is there inequivalency between these two zonings that essentially have the same function? along the waterfront and in many other locations. The second question is that, yes, private roads lack a definition, a clear definition, as Peter's pointed out through the various configurations. They're extended driveways. But at what point does a long driveway become a private road? How many houses does it take? And when the bylaw says that on a private road, you may not have access to emergency services, what's the criteria for that, please? Under what circumstances would my private road not have access to emergency services? I think that too needs a definition, and that's part of the private road function. Thank you.
I think I got it.
Counselor?
Suzanne, Peter, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm very thankful that we have people like you in our community who's taking this very serious. I will hold my comments. Thank you so much, Suzanne and Peter, for that. Thank you.
Counselor Cameron?
Yes, Suzanne and Peter, thank you so much for this. I'll refrain at this time from asking any questions. I'm really not 100% clear as to some of your asks here. So I'll get those answers to that, and then I may have something else to say at another time. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And fools rush in where angels fear to tread. But I am going to make a few comments. So first of all, thank you very much. And you've raised a number of issues which I don't propose or pretend to understand all of the intricacies. One of the things I'm grappling with was what was the ask. And one of the asks that I heard repeated here just now was, what was the intent of the RLS zone? And I've been around this particular zoning bylaw since 2006. And in my mind, the intent of the RLS, the residential limited services zone, was quite well captured in the slide which you presented. And
That was slide number 3 or 4. It's on the first page of the last page of the.
yes, it's to protect, the intent was to protect the corporation, the township, from the expectation that the township, the corporation, would have any responsibility for bringing any of these private roads up to a municipal standard. And in my opinion, that was the sole intent or the main intent of this RLS zone. There were other limited services that we were going to provide. We were not going to collect garbage down those roads, and they have to bring their garbage out to a public road. And we were not going to snowplow or maintain those roads in any way, shape, or form. So that was my understanding of the intent of that zone. Now, how that conflicts or contradicts the RU zone, I'm not sure, because I haven't done the one-to-one analysis that you have. But I'm looking forward to hearing the comments from our planner, because in my mind, if the ask is to clarify the intent of what is the rural limited services zone, in my mind, it's clear. The intent is to protect the corporation from any expectation of development of those roads, any investment in those roads, which would have the effect of bringing them up to a municipal standard. So I see it rather simply. You see it in a much more complicated manner. And I don't know where it leads from here, but I sure need advice on this one, because I'm affected by about 4 different ways in this presentation.
No, it's good points though, for sure. Councilor Hunt?
I don't have really any too many questions right now. I kind of agree with the mayor. I was on council at the time. Most of the thing was to protect the township with demands for increased service. As far as the definition of a private road compared to, as you say, a long driveway. Driveway is consolidated on a property. Private roads are generally consolidated between 2 or 3 properties. They all have ownership of the land on that road. So that's where I define the difference between what we class as a private road and what is just an extended driveway. And the thing was, basically, when we decided on it was, we were being asked at the time, on a lot of these private roads, can we not gravel them? Can we not grade them? Can we not do this? Can we not do that? Very few of them are wide enough and big enough to actually accommodate any major equipment that the township owns to do any work on them. We're really putting our equipment at danger for liability, not only to our equipment, but liability to other property when we're trying to, because as you know, a lot of them have 3 or 4 places on them, and 2 people would want something done, and the other 2 didn't want anything touched on that. So that's, I think as the mayor said, that was basically our intent, was to make it clear that the township wasn't doing anything.
Suzanne?
Permission to respond to this, thank you. You are correct, and I like that definition that a private road is one that is not maintained by the township. Perfectly clear definition, not an issue. Questions that raises is, at what point does a shared driveway become a new private road? 2 houses, 3 houses, 4 houses? You've said in the draft bylaws that there will be no new private roads created. And yet there are lots being subdivided, and probably will be in the future, where there are shared driveways that have more than 2 abutting roads. Do they become, by definition, an RLF listing? And maybe that's not important, but when you've also labeled waterfront properties on private roads as RLS, and this is the second part of the question, is waterfront properties on RLS are equivalent to waterfront properties on RU lots. RU lots theoretically are not serviced by private roads, they're serviced by public roads. But does that justify a different treatment in zoning, in what you can do, what you can build, on how you can develop your lot? The fact that it's on a public road as opposed to a private road, when they're all on waterfront, and the other problem that you're dealing with is trying to protect the waterfront.
So I don't, Mr. Chair, I don't like to jump in front of Mr. Terry and Mr. Ordway, but there's one other factor that I think should be brought to bear here. What is being called here a private road is a misnomer, in my opinion. These roads do not exist. They are non-existent, non-surveyed rights of way, common usage rights of way, where the land underneath the traveled portion is owned by the owner. So for example, if you take Empire Hannah Road, Tuttle Point Road, Tuttle Point is a series of strips that cross the entire peninsula. The road goes down the middle, but the folks that own the lot that crosses the peninsula also own the land underneath that right of way. It's a road that does not exist. It has never been surveyed. It is just a usage kind of thing. And, you know, the same with Empire Hannah Road, and I'm familiar with a couple of others where I know for sure that the surveys have never been undertaken. The road alignments have never been defined, and they are just usages that have developed over time. And to respond to the lady's comments, we're very careful now when we do severances that we do not create lots that are not on public roads. We're very careful with our severances. And we will not, an individual, of course, that owns a piece of land is always welcome to apply to the county for a severance. But when that application comes back to us for our recommendation, unless it's on an open, maintained public road, we will not give a council township recommendation to that severance. We're not the final decision makers, the county is, but we will never advise nor consent to it. Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Oh, thank you for the clarity. It's good. So, Connor, or Councilor Hunter, sorry, were you finished? You're good?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'm wondering if you could unpack slide 35. You didn't have the time to pause on it, but I glanced.
Can you tell me which one that is?
Sure.
Because I'm working off a different package.
I see. Under development density,
Okay, development density.
the part that caught my eye was the conclusion that says density is not an issue on small lots. And I'm wondering if the RLS zone has been an earmark to prevent any further density in a roundabout way. And if things were changed too much, you might see that density change very quickly if over time, over a long period of time, people started pushing for condominiums on the waterfront, right in between Johnstown and Cardinal, which would achieve that low density, but in the different definition of 8 to 12 residential units per hectare. Whereas on another slide, you have a small property as 0.4 hectares or less, which would have 1 unit. And if per hectare, that would be 1 to 3 units, which is micro density compared to the low density range of 8 to 12.
I understand. And the 8 to 12 came in from what's in the township official plan defining low density. I don't know what low density would be. I don't want more development in our area. And quite frankly, there are really very few properties along the waterfront that will be capable of being subdivided. None in the RLS that are proposed for RLS, and only a few in what is proposed for RU. The densities that are there is I took the number of properties on a road or in an area and multiplied and divided them by the total area of that area to come out with the density in it. As you can see, they are micro densities. I don't think density is an issue with regard to that. Besides, if there are no private public services available, there will be no large development going on. You won't get the sewage, you won't have the water. So it becomes self-controlled. Is that helpful, or did I miss that?
Well, I think you're right in that it would over time work itself out, but you might get that 1 or 2 that sneak in and use a term like low density condominiums on the waterfront and pay for that service to be installed privately and bring the private road that goes to it up to township standards and so on and so forth. You can see how it could slow roll or snowball.
But is any zoning anywhere capable of preventing that if a convincing case is made and the developers work within the rule or eventually go to whatever the Ontario Municipal Board is now called and get a rule? Yeah, I'm sure it's possible, but I just don't see it being likely in our current environment. Might happen. I'm not definitely a
Cody, do you have questions?
I don't thank you.
Good. So then I will thank Peter and Suzanne for a fantastic presentation. And certainly lots to go through and lots more to think about. So thanks again. Well, yeah, actually, that's a good point, Mr. Mayor. Jordan and Steve are both here. I know we're going to go through a broader discussion, but while Peter and Suzanne are still here, do you have any comments to add towards the presentation as it was that might help with some clarity?
Certainly, a lot of work has been put into sort of assessing and studying the RLS standards and the mapping that we prepared. And appreciate another set of eyes on this to sort of point out what are perceived as inconsistencies. I don't think we want to say too much right now, but what I would say is that the intent really is to apply the RLS to properties that are accessed by private road. And I know that's a simple statement, and I think there's some discussion around here. We've done our best to try and identify those properties. Recognize that, of course, in the existing zoning bylaw, there are a number of properties that are RLS zoning today that we didn't feel should have fallen into that category, so we tried to fix that. I think you've heard me say in the past as well, we're doing our best to try and get the mapping right. And there's going to be situations that maybe we didn't because of the scale or we dismissed it, whatever. Rest assured, there are opportunities to fix that kind of thing through amendments. And it's certainly the relationship between RLS and private road reasons is different than trying to relate RLS simply to the waterfront. In large part, that's where the RLS properties are, but that's where the private roads are. A lot of the private roads lead to the waterfront. And so it's common for along the shoreline there to be a lot of RLS zoned properties. There may be some that are not waterfront that are still zoned RLS, and there may be some rural properties that have waterfront that have public road access, and that's why they're not zoned RLS. So it can be a very confusing kind of mapping exercise. And without getting into the weeds and checking every property and stuff, that's why we don't always get it 100% right. As for the standards that have been applied, we recognize that to some extent, zoning standards are designed to achieve a certain form of development on a piece of land. And arguably, those standards are somewhat arbitrary. Lot coverage, for example, if you establish a high percentage, you can have a lot more intense type of development. A lower lot coverage, you scale it back. Lot coverage isn't the only type of standard that controls the intensity, but you also have things like setbacks from lot lines, floor areas, those sorts of things. So it's a kind of a myriad of different issues that come together to try and establish what the right standards are. We've presented in this bylaw draft standards that we feel work for that purpose. And the whole idea of RLS standards being similar to rural standards, while they may be similar, I think they ought to be different because the RLS, as a general rule, are those properties that are smaller and on the water. And so we may have larger RLS properties as well. And if standards don't work for a project, whether it's a redevelopment project or a new project, that's why we have application processes for things like minor variances for zoning amendments. And a case can be made why those standards are wrong, and we justify on the basis of whatever planning rationale is put forward, then we can see a way to approving those exceptions. So those are just a few general comments that I would make. They probably only touched on a few of the things, but maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Okay. Sorry. So then, did you want one last comment, one final comment before we move on?
I did. I wanted a very short rebuttal to that very last statement.
Very short if you can.
The difference between the RU properties and the RL properties, RLS properties, as we were trying to show with all that statistical analysis, is not there. Hence the question of why are they being treated differently with setbacks and property coverage and things like that. They are the same general size, property-wise, frontage-wise, and everything else. And they are beside each other, and they should be treated with the same set of zoning requirements.
Thank you.
Before I depart, I'd just like to point out, it is not our intent to take on Novatech on this thing. I recognize fully, having tried to go through some of the stuff, how difficult this whole process is. We were just trying to answer questions that we've had for quite a while with respect to this, and this provides a framework for framing those questions, rather than trying to nitpick things that the company has put forward. So if it's taken as if I'm again, Bert, I apologize for that.
I've had a lot of worse things that's me.
Thanks again, Peter and Suzanne. All right, so we are moving on to 6A1. And Connor, you have, what's the minutes note that Mr. Connor Cleary has left the table. And we'll come back on item 2. And Wendy, if you could, the development coordinator, could give us some background on 6A1, please.
Thank you, Chair. I have a application for severance at 2106 County Road 21. Just want to point out 2 errors on the staff report. As usual, I always catch it in my last review for the meeting, and one it was pointed out to me, so thank you for that. The address is 3106 County Road 21, and I think in my report, just in the title, I put County Road 2. And then also the size of the property is 13.8 hectares, and in the background, the first sentence there, I had written acres. So just thanks for letting me get that out of the way.
Where was that second change?
It's in the first sentence under background.
13.8.
13.8 hectares.
In hectares, correct. So throughout the document, it's written correctly, but I just written it incorrectly there. Okay, I'm almost at the right page. Sorry, guys. Bear with me. So have applicant and property owners Fiona Cleary and Douglas Cleary, who are joining us today. They're the owners of a lot that is 13.8 hectares. It's at the corner of County Road 21, mostly on Cleary Road, and also has frontage on Gooden Road, just west of Spencerville. The application proposes to create a new 1 hectare lot that would include an existing dwelling and an accessory solar panel system. So the retained would be 12.8 hectares. And that's planned to be utilized as part of a larger nearby agricultural operation. So the land is designated agricultural policy, resource policy area, and it's zoned agricultural in the zoning bylaw. So we know that in the official plan, we are not allowed to create new residential building lots, but the official plan does permit lot creation for existing dwellings that are surplus to farming operations as a result of the farm consolidation. And this fits those policies. We do believe the township should recommend that a zoning amendment is required out of the condition of the severance approval to prohibit future non-agricultural use on the retained parcel. Because the lot, well, we always do this, but especially because the lot is already undersized, the zoning bylaw requires an agricultural lot to be 40 hectares, and we're taking 1 hectare out of that. I know the applicant made an effort to keep the severed lands to the minimum size required for the dwelling and the servicing. So it's at 2.47 acres, which I know is consistent with some of the other severance applications we've done that are similar. So in the same zoning bylaw amendment application, we would just need to address that reduced lot size, and that can all be done in the same zoning bylaw amendment application. Let me stop. Okay, a revised sketch was provided by the applicant after their severance application was submitted. Some of the lot lines that were shown in their severance application just seemed a little bit out of whack. There might have been some typos there. So I would reference, and it's been provided to the counties, the sketch on page 23 of 149, where it shows a different lot dimension there, which I think was intended for the application, and it shows some setbacks there. Now the setbacks I think are estimated there. We do recommend that a building location survey be provided. One of the conditions would be that a survey is provided for the separate lot. Anyways, we're recommending that it's a building location survey, and that would confirm the location of the septic system and the other structures that are on the lot. We want to make sure that the setbacks are complying with the zoning bylaw, and if they're not, the building location survey would show us that, and it could be addressed in the zoning amendment application.
Thank you. Comments or concerns? Cody?
I have nothing.
Councilor Ryan?
Well, I think this is already an agricultural property and has been a long time. I'm getting a little concerned with the township that we're requiring zoning amendments because agricultural lot was already an agricultural lot. We're abiding by what our official plan was to allow non-use residential buildings be separated from the agricultural lot. It was just creating a different one. This is already an agricultural lot, has been for 100 years or more. So and it's right next door to an agricultural lot. It's owned by the same family. So I really think that we're starting to add a lot of red tape here for something to do with zoning amendment when it's already, because it lacks 2 or 3 acres, getting 40 acres, and it's going to say it's going to a family that already owns thousands of acres in there of agricultural land. I think this is a little ridiculous. So.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm kind of, I don't see any issues here, but I kind of agree with Councilor Hunter that really a zoning bylaw amendment really shouldn't be required here because it is agricultural usage has been. My question is if this lot that I'm showing as lot 31 concession 6, if it was merged with the one immediately on the left of it, it would be agricultural because I think the one left of it is agriculture. So, I mean, if they merge the ownership, that would end the issue. It wouldn't require a bylaw amendment. I'm really not in favor of requiring the zoning bylaw amendment anyway. Other than that, I don't have any problem with the staff recommendation.
Councilor Cameron?
I have absolutely no issues, and I would support the recommendation.
Councilor Dillon?
I would support the recommendation by the community development.
And I support it as well. I do question a little bit as to, and I'm not questioning the intent. The intent is it's their land, they do it all of it for sure. But as far as the severed portion, if the intent is that they wanted to do something else with that property, if it's still retaining its agricultural zoning as opposed to being maybe turned into rural or into RU, for instance, that might be where the next step would be. And that's where I wonder if part of this conversation should be focused on what the property becomes as being severed after the fact, so that we can, understand the intent of, the use that they want to have for it, unless it's just to sell it for residential, for sell a house or something out there, right? So. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does, but I think she has an answer for
Through the
that.
chair, if I can respond to some of the comments here. The zoning amendment is required because we are, our official plan and the potential policy statement says that we can't create a new building lot in the prime agricultural area. So what the zoning amendment is going to do, primarily why we're asking for this, is to prohibit non-agricultural use on that retained parcel. So if we're doing a severance, we've got a new lot there, we have to make sure that we're not gonna build another house on there in the future, right? And so that zoning amendment is going to be required, and addressing the deficient lot size is all done through the same application. It's not adding extra red tape for the application.
No, I know, and I'm less concerned, like the retained part makes sense, and I agree that we have lots of conversation about making sure that the rest of that property stays residential. It's more the part that's severed off is still subjected, you know, it's 2.47 acres to all the rules of agricultural zone property, as opposed to maybe freeing it up a little bit by saying now it's a rural property, so that's an RU property. And that's part of the conversation that I think has not been brought up yet, but is something we have to look at as well in this application to help facilitate that if need be. So, and I think it's more of a statement than it's a question. There's nothing, you know, I just wonder if the intent is that they want to then make that, you know, rural opposed to keep it agricultural, and what the implication there is. So, that's just this is my comments on it. Otherwise, it's a big deal.
The residential use on that property is permitted in the agricultural zone, and the official plan, that land is agricultural policy area. So I wouldn't recommend changing it to another zone, but I think the zone that it's in isn't restricting what the intended use for the property.
Yeah, this is already in the agricultural zone, that property. So it can't be built on even if this property 7. You can't get a severance in an agricultural zone unless it's a 100-acre farm, and this is 40. So there couldn't be a severance issued anyway. Don't need to be zone restricted on it. It's already restricted.
Through the chair, so if we're severing the surplus dwelling off of the agricultural property, the 13.8 acres, which you can 1 hectare off in that dwelling, now we have another lot. So someone, I know the intent is to use that retained lot for agricultural purposes, but without the rezoning, there would be nothing stopping them from building a house on that.
I was saying requires to establish a house on an agricultural zone, it has to be 40 hectares. Not 40 hectares.
No, I think it would be a lot of record, and you could build a house that's accessory to an agricultural
zone.
operation.
We've already restricted a couple over the years, wanted to build a house on an agricultural zone on a 20 or 25 hectare lot. We're told they couldn't build on it.
Because it didn't meet the 40.
Yeah. Didn't meet an established agricultural operation. We went through that before here when why it has to be 40 acres to be an agricultural, viable agricultural operation that they could build on.
I'm not sure I understood. Is it were they proposing a severance to create a new agricultural lot that would need to be 40 hectares?
Build on.
I think the example that Councillor Hunter is referring to, and I do recall, the lot had changed hands. It wasn't 40 hectares. And it had changed hands, and the new owners wanted to build a house on it. And their aspiration was to start a small farm, but it didn't meet the 40 hectare standard. And so their application to build a small house couldn't be accepted. That was the issue, I think. But in any case, I mean, I guess it's a small thing to get a zoning bylaw amendment here to do this. But I have a different question, Mr. Chairman. I think I sense that the recommendation is going to gain support at the table, but this is just a side question through the chair to the community development coordinator. So I'm on page 20 of 149. And on page 20 of 149, I have the colored drawing, and I see the severed lot is surrounded with yellow. And the retained lot is going to be outlined in blue. And at the bottom right corner, there's a little dog off Cleary Road. And I'm just wondering if there's a history there. Why would that be? Is there any explanation for that? Makes no sense.
House there.
Oh, there was a house there at one point?
There is one.
There is one there now?
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Oh,
Mr. Modler, any questions?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so there's a recommendation on board. I need a mover and a seconder.
so moved.
Or moved by the mayor, seconded
Second.
by Councillor Cameron. I'm gonna call the question if there are no more comments. Any more comments? Seeing none. Call the question on the recommendation as it is written. All in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous. Honor, you can come back to the table. All right, Stephen Jordan, we are on. Welcome. To item 6.2, comprehensive zoning bylaw review. No overtime. Steve, do you want to or Steve and Jordan, do you want to walk us through the changes, and then if anybody has questions or comments to those changes, then we can get there. I think ultimately the goal tonight would be to either, I lost my two goals. I don't know where I put them. Either to move this through and set a date for public meeting, or do this again, I guess. But ultimately, I think we want to get a date set for a public meeting here. The public has to say about this document. So I'll turn it over to you guys.
Sure. I'll start. So we were here last, thanks again for having us. We were here last in November. So at that meeting, we presented just a summary of the changes, or sorry, some recommended changes based on comments we heard through the public consultation process. And so this next draft, what we've done is we've marked up the bylaw and made some of those changes. And then through the review and looking through the bylaw again, there's a few extra changes just in terms of making sure there's some consistencies with the bylaw. So at that meeting in November, we had a list of a few changes. So what we've done is we've made those. At that meeting, there was a recommendation to look again at the recreational vehicles provisions on commercial properties. We haven't proposed any changes to the bylaw, just because we wanted to keep it at identifying that you're permitting that use on properties where it's a residential use, as opposed to maybe making a confusing scenario where you are parking a vehicle on a property where it's a commercial zone, but that zone might not permit a certain use. And so there could be some interpretation confusions there. So this next draft has got some changes. What we've done is we've also updated the schedules. The delegation we heard from Mr. Davies, he highlighted some changes to the RLS zone. What we've done is we've identified properties where they have frontage on a private road, and I've changed them to stay as a rural zone. If they have frontage on a public main road, they've either been changed to a different appropriate zone, so most likely a rural zone. So there have been a reduction in the use of the RLS zone in terms of the number of properties that it is applied to. One thing we wanted to just highlight is in the bylaw, we had provided a definition for an on-farm diversified use and then included it in the agricultural and rural zones. Since working on the bylaw and over time, we've come to just sort of realize that there aren't enough sort of provisions to control the type of use and limit on-farm diversified use in terms of its area on a property. So what we've proposed is to keep the definition in the bylaw, but remove that use from the agricultural and rural zones. And if someone were to propose an on-farm diversified use, this just means that they would have to go through a zoning bylaw amendment where you would be able to sort of look at that use more closely and establish appropriate zone standards at that time. Also, what I believe was included in the package was a draft official plan amendment. We've talked about this before, that will have to update the official plan to include policies that would allow additional residential units. So that would allow properties to have both a second unit within a home or within a detached structure. So your your official plan right now only allows one. This update would allow one within it and in a separate accessory structure. And the counties just updated their official plan in January of this year. So now that that policy is in place, we can update the township's plan, and then that will feed into the zoning bylaw where we proposed and presented to the committee and the public additional residential unit provisions. And so that section of the zoning bylaw has also slightly been amended since the last version, just to clarify some provisions around additional residential units. So that is just a high-level summary of what the changes are. If there are any questions, Steve and I can help answer them. But provided the committee is okay with the proposed changes, we're hoping we could move forward and schedule a public meeting. Through the public meeting process, there's also the opportunity for the public to come out again and ask some questions or submit written comments. So there could be future changes to the bylaw. But we think we're at a point where we could be scheduling a public meeting.
Thanks. Spence, anything to add?
No, I don't think so. I think we're sort of summarized everything that really was important to highlight. If you look through the draft, you'll notice everything that's changed is in the color. Some of which were deliberate changes as a result of the last meeting. Some of them were little things that we thought we needed to fix as we worked through just kind of sanitizing the bylaw, think of it that way. So we're happy to answer these questions that you might have, but I think it's important where we're at in the process to establish a date for a public meeting, unless you feel otherwise, and direct us to make other changes. But like Jordan said, before there's a final decision on it, there'll still be an opportunity to make revisions after the public meeting. So I think there's no harm in getting on with that. That's for requirement right away.
Thanks. All right, so let's go around the table then. So Greg, I'm gonna start with you this time.
Okay, just a few questions. On page 39 of 149. It's under the definitions. Okay. Under bed and breakfast, we're specific to it's got to be a single dwelling. But under boarding house, we took the word single out. Is there a reason for that? The reason being is that a bed and breakfast are part of, are to be established as part of a single dwelling as defined, whereas a boarding house could be any type of dwelling, I suppose. So I think our preference would have been to be single, because I don't think it really is such an important change. But boarding houses are typically a single dwelling that will take in a number of quarters. And the person usually lives there, right? In which the proprietor supplies, yeah, that's right. Because under bed and breakfast, it indicates in which the owner resides, but I don't seem to see that under a boarding house, the requirement of the boarder, that the owner has to reside in it. I think the definition for boarding house is in large part what's in the existing bylaw. I don't need an answer tonight. Like, these are just some of the questions I've seen.
Next one.
I get on page 27, page 61 of 149, or probably 27 of yours. Do we need a definition under 6 of what a hard surface is in relation to parking spaces? And the reason I ask that is over the last 2 years, we've had the refreshment vehicle, and where we the latest one in Cardinal, we had some issues with the parking lot. And I'm just wondering, do we need is there a definition, or are we very particular on what a hard surface is? Does it have to be gravel, pavement, or dirt? Because I think we may have been a little bit inconsistent in our application between the one in New Wexford and in the one in Cardinal on the parking. The one, I don't believe the one in New Wexford has it marked. They have a nice parking lot, but there's no lanes marked where you have to park, where I think we've indicated in Cardinal, that is now a requirement under their agreement. I'm just asking the question, do we need to define what hard is?
I don't think we need to define what hard surface is, but if you do have in number section 7 there, a parking area surface shall be maintained with a stable surface such as concrete, asphalt, gravel, or crushed stone. So it can be any of those things to be a hard surface.
Sorry, I must. And then my last question would be on 49, where we've dropped from the lot minimum for the apartment dwelling lot minimum from, it looks like 1250 square meters to 700. The reason why we dropped that by half.
Which page is that on?
So it'd be on page 49 of yours. Under apartment dwelling, 2/3 of the way down.
Yeah, I see it there.
Sorry.
I'm trying to recall the thinking there. Arguably, we could have dropped it to, some bylaws even have a 0 or a nil in for areas and leave it to other criteria to determine what's reasonable.
So there's a footnote, so that what we've done, actually, I can help explain this. This bylaw, we had originally defined a triplex, a fourplex, and an apartment building. But sometimes when you think about what that looks like on a property, in some ways they're the same. And what we've done is we've removed the definition of a triplex and fourplex and redefined what an apartment dwelling is. So an apartment dwelling is 3 or more units divided horizontally or vertically. And that can sort of makes your bylaw a bit more flexible in allowing different types of dwellings on a property without it being fully defined. So what we've done is we've reduced the minimum lot area to 700. And when we go to the footnotes, the minimum size is 700 for the first 3 dwelling units. And so when you have more units proposed, you would increase the minimum lot area by another 230 meters squared for each additional dwelling unit. So this would be in terms of lot creation. So if someone were to create a property, we would look to the minimum lot area standards and look at the number of units they're proposing, and then apply the minimum lot area standard that way.
That's all we got.
I guess my first one was, I feel like when we last left off with this, we were hoping to see another map of the updated resources map as well from a schedule perspective, and I don't see one here. I don't know if that's a resources like the aggregate, let's move on, everything else, were we not expecting something?
Do you want, Mr. Mayor, do you want to talk about the resource, the aggregate one that Chris is doing, so that that question can go with it?
Okay, but maybe, I was actually hoping to ask Mr. Pence, what's the update on that? The county basically has deferred official plan amendment number 3, which is to adopt the aggregate resources policy. They haven't set a date for it to come back. Is there any update on that?
Through you, Mr. Chair, there hasn't been an update that we're aware of. It's been deferred. So when there is a decision made by county council on that OPA number 3, that'll kick the township and all the other municipalities in the county, for that matter, into a need to do an official plan update to theirs as well, to reflect that new policy and mapping requirement. At that point, we'll do an official plan amendment. Interesting, that will be number 3 as well. Just as we're doing the update to the OPA for the additional residential units, as a result of the county's OPA number 2, we're going to do an official plan amendment to adopt that new policy requirement.
So, in response to yours, I did report to council the reason that the county council didn't adopt the aggregate resources policy as official plan amendment number 3 was because as we got to the table as a council to adopt that amendment, a number of councillors were very concerned about the mapping that we had been forced to use. And the provincial policy statement said that the county shall use the mapping that was provided by the Ministry of Natural Resources for aggregate. And all of us, I would say to a man on county council, are very concerned about the accuracy of that mapping that Ministry of Natural Resources provides. We don't believe that we should be obligated to use it because it's never been ground truthed on the ground, and it covers such a large percentage of our ground area in all of our townships. So it was the mapping that became the issue, and realizing that that was a large issue, it was deferred without a date to bring it back.
Good, thank you.
But that answers my question. Anyways, my entirety was, where's that situation at? Because I know we were concerned last time I saw that map about how bad.
Any more?
I mean, I saw the boarding house thing as well, but not having a proprietor necessarily in it. That's how I read that. And the other question I basically had about that is, where it says a boarding house is only permitted through an amendment to this law. So every time a boarding house, the way I read that is every time a boarding house is wanting to be established, they have to come before committee as well. Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
That sentence was put a bit for clarity, so that it's not.
So then when I took note of that, I said, well, it probably doesn't matter about the other part of that, provider being in place, because that's what we'll have to have that conversation. So, okay. I think we talked about an improved street after all this conversation. And I think there. So our 3.6, which is on page 52, I guess, according to the this is your draft. Sorry, this is your original draft without the minutes currently, so I'm not sure what that is. But when I read this, it looks like we're, I know that the way that whole thing came about was not necessarily the ideal manner, but this here basically adopts that to say we're now okay with that, is how I read that. Is that a true statement, or?
Well, through you, that appeal that has been resolved, dropped, I guess, put it that way. So this amendment that's in here now is just essentially including the amendment that had been approved by council. And one of the things when we do a new zoning bylaw, we have to be mindful of not forgetting to include any amendments that have happened since we started this project. So for example, if you do an amendment to the bylaw tonight, before this new bylaw gets approved, we have to make sure that we incorporate that or consolidate it into here so that it doesn't get undone, if you will, because the new bylaw will repeal the existing bylaw and any amendments there too. That makes sense?
Yeah, oh, totally, and
So that's why it's in here, and that's why you'll see other exceptions in some of the zone categories, so that we don't forget them.
yeah, and I guess more in my, when I was going with that is, say 50 years down the road, when these need to be torn down and then somebody put something else in there, it ties it to that where somebody might want to say, we want to go back to putting a single house on that property again or something like that, or maybe a field. So, the adopting of it was what I was trying to do. So that's what we're doing. So, okay. And on page 58, again, of your document there. When I'm looking at the zone provisions for Main Street commercial, I'm seeing a lot of zero, like for your minimum yardage is 0 and 1 meters and things like that. And so I'm trying to figure out how that allows you to access sort of the rear of those facilities. If we have a new Main Street commercial building put up with zero on the exterior, how are they going to access the backyard of the backyard of the facility? So I'm trying to figure out why we had 0 and then instead of having about 3 meters or something to allow a car to get back there.
Well, there's a 0, there's a minimum and a maximum. So the idea for the downtown is to have a form of development that allows for things to come close to the street, to have 0 lot lines between them. It's all about having that street presence. And it doesn't mean that every development can accommodate that, because you may need to provide yards for access to the rear, but it's there to allow for that possibility.
Yeah, like I said, I was just thinking about the minimum time, not being able to access the backyard or something like that, making a problem for a new development as opposed to the existing structures that are there. So.
And I think those standards are from the existing bylaw anyways, so we just get it for. We try to keep those standards intact where we could.
Okay, and that's all I have is just going through this. So.
Thanks, Chris. Councilor Bill.
Yes, thank you. Steve, on page 79, I'm hoping this would be your 45. Interior side in R1, you moved it from 1.5 for partial service, 1.5 or 3 million. Why not just make it 3? You see that?
So it says 1.5 or 3.
Yeah.
Is it, sorry, page 45?
Yeah, well, you're 45, my 79, yes. Yes, that's right.
So we didn't change that,
That's always been there, 1.5. We changed it from the private service 3, from 6 to 3. But why can't we just make that full partial service 1.5 or 3, make it 3? Like, why can't we take that 1.5 mil out? That's all I'm asking.
you could. We've chosen to allow for 1.5 as being a smaller yard, in part because it speaks to increased density, infill, more efficient use of land. You'll note that there is a footnote to that. Footnote B says you need 1 tree on one side and 1.5 on the other, except where you've got a garage, and you can put 1.5 on both sides.
Yes.
1.5 is a common standard in urban service communities.
Okay.
And-
I'm just referring to, I guess there's one on E Street that catch my eye in Cardinal, where we're putting up a duplex on, I don't know what would be the north side. He can't even get a ladder between his neighbor and his house. He couldn't get a ladder up to fix his leaf drops. It's that close. And the 3 meters would be 9 feet. At least you could get something down there to work. That's all I'm looking
Yeah, frankly, it's one of those standards where I would say that 1.5 is a very common urban standard. You see it virtually every urban service municipality. If you think it's too small, there's no magic to that number. It could be bigger, but it does speak to the idea of efficient use of land, getting things more compact. And maybe that's not what everybody likes, but it does.
I like to hear it better. I like to hear that more around the table on that one, because I just find it too small, that's all. That's fine.
Mr. Chair,
I'd like to support what Councillor Doe was saying, because we had a situation in the village not long ago where exactly that situation arrived, that the distance between the fence and the house, the person couldn't get a ladder to fix his eave troughs, and they were feuding neighbors, and he couldn't get permission from the guy on the other side. So, I mean, I'd like to see the 3 meter standard. I know what Mr. Pence is telling us, it is more efficient use of and more density, but at the same time, personally, I'd like to see the 3 meter standard, especially in our villages. I think that it would save us a lot of hassle around the table, because when it comes down to neighbors' disputes, we get involved in them, whether we want to be or not.
Just a few more second.
Connor, you have your
That's
hand,
all.
Connor, you have your hand up, do you wanna, is it comment directly to this?
Yeah, I guess just a clarification through the chair, that 3 meters on one side. So if there's no fence, that would be 6 meters. Which then creates more
Nothing to do with
distance.
the fence.
Then you have to assume that the neighbor's will never put up the fence.
Yeah, like that, it kind of makes it go from 1.5 meters with a fence and then 1.5 meters.
So you can't go on the other guy's property, whether there's a fence there or not.
No, I'm just saying the spacing. 'Cause if we just arbitrarily double the spacing minimum, a whiplash effect makes it bigger, does it not?
Yeah, it makes it 6 meters between 2 buildings instead of possible 3.
Which could limit development in the ways that we're trying to restore development.
Thank you. Back, I'll just ask this quick to the player. So the 1.5 has been in our zoning bylaw. Is it for a fully service lot, just so that I'm correct in this. To change it to 3 would be a new change to it. We've been using 1.5 for a while, right?
We're just checking to confirm that. But just to be clear to you, Chair, the 1.5, it says 1.5 on one, and 3 on the other. The reason I have a 3 on the other is that if they don't have an attached garage, they need a parking spot that could go beside the house and still fit in there. That's why we have it that way. If there is an attached garage, then you could have 1.5 on both sides.
And we're using 2 in the old. Is that right?
Two. Yeah, 2. So
Yeah, we're using 2.
6 feet.
Right now in the old, in the bylaw that we're using, right, in 21235, we're using 2 meters.
Okay, so you're looking. Seems to be there's a
Just like the little information, I'd like to hear
Bit of
other
support
people around the
for that.
table, what they feel. That's all. Because of that example.
You know, I mean, just this conversation and the example given so far, I mean, 1.5 is really not that much space. And even if it was a garage there, you still need to find a way to get onto the roof of that garage. So I would support that being true more than 1.5 as well.
I think you can always get onto the roof either from the front or the back to do any repairs or issues. And thinking somewhere down the road, I have no idea, but there's a lot of places where they have 0 setbacks now. And when will we be coming to that, or will we ever come to that? I don't know. It may change with the tiny house situation. I just don't know. I would personally, I would leave it the way it is. That's my opinion.
at the 1.5.
At the 1.503, the way it
We're
is.
using 2.
Yeah, it's actually.
We're using 2. Yeah.
Shrinking it by 0.5. Okay, anybody else?
I would just like to see that change to 3, maybe even just within the village limits. Just to echo Councilor Delvaux at point, it's incredibly difficult to get in between dwellings to work on them with that little space. Just to avoid any neighborhood disputes, it should be left, or it should be changed to 3.
I understand the access to a roof. That can be mitigated with patience and a little bit of planning. I understand that the minimums exist for extreme circumstances in some cases, like getting a gurney through safely. And in other cases, you know, it gives more room to the property owner. If you make it bigger, what's stopping people from filling in that space with a bunch of stuff, pile of lumber or whatever? You would still need to negotiate with your neighbor if you needed to access the roof. So like, I don't know. You might not solve the problems in the simple way that you want, and I don't know enough about it, but I'm just kind of pointing out having the minimum to make it easier for emergency services is important to keep in mind. Making it too big doesn't really solve common maintenance issues. If people are going to use that space to park something or put a bunch of stuff, then I don't know, maybe there's things like that that kind of gets muddy, and maybe we should just leave it. Because someone like me comes up with ideas, right?
I think 1.5 and 3 makes sense. That's still, we're in rural and yeah, we have a little more, we like to see more space, but we're being pushed for better land use all the time. And like I know we're still in a rural area, but the city's moving to us quicker all the time. And we look at the city and there's zero pretty near in between the new houses being built. We want economical houses, and the more space we take away, they're going to put up, the higher the price of that house is going to go. So I think that 1.5 and 3, I see the rationalization for that. If they don't have a garage, they got 10 feet one side, and 5 feet on the other side. So.
Okay, so where am I at with that possible change? It's sort of 50-50. You want to comment?
Yeah, I'd support the 3. Just one, just for the emergency services, so that if required, at least from the prop, if I have this understood correct, from the property line to my house, there's a 3-meter leeway. So if I, as a property owner, want to make sure between my property line and my house, there's 3 meters, and I want emergency service, it's there, as opposed to the 1.5 meters that my neighbor, you know, I like the 3-meter aspect.
Chris?
You know, just, I know we just talked about it, and, you know, I understand that I do like the 3-meter more than I like the 1.5 meter. You know, the other thing we got to keep in mind, and you know, I know we talked a bit about how we condense and put all this stuff into one smaller space, but you know, we really do have a lot of property in the area out here, and you know, by the time we need to worry about 1.5 million meters, will be when we're, you know, I don't know, 100, 200, 300,000 people in the township. So, you know, by that time, somebody else can rewrite this law to say 1.5 and put some townhouses in it if they want to. But right now, I really think for beautification and curb appeal, the 3-meter work better for me as well, not just the safety factor we talked about. So
a few more 3s around the table. So, Mr. Pence?
For what it's worth, I'm just gonna throw this comment out through you, Mr. Chair. I'll remind you of this discussion the first time a developer wants to build out either the Meadowlands or the Lockmaster subdivision, when they're looking for the 1.5 urban standard. And we'll have to explain to them then that this discussion had happened and it was a conscious decision to go to a bigger side yard.
Absolutely.
Like I said, it's these standards are somewhat arbitrary. There's usually should always be some rationalization of why you're picking the yards that you do. The reason we went with the 1.5 is in almost every bylaw that we work in, a municipality that has an urban component, 1.5 is the norm. and that's what builders have come to expect. So I just throw that out there and just to remind you of that factual.
Yeah, and I think, I can speak for most of council that we're certainly in favor of development. We wouldn't want to tie our voters' hands. So, Mr. Mayor, did you want to?
Well, you know, and I see I see Mr. Pence's advice, but personally, when it comes to these two new subdivisions that are under discussion, I personally would have no problem supporting the three. And just because of the experience that we've had, you always got to remember, it isn't the builder that's going to be living in the house. It's going to be the person that he sold it to, or the next person after that, or three owners down the line on each side, and now all of a sudden you've got a different story. So, you know, to my mind, the 3 meters just saves everybody problems and gets the development set off in the right foot right from the beginning. And if they really are bent to get to the 1.5, let them apply for a zoning for an adjustment. What's it called? The committee of adjustment. Let them apply to the committee of adjustment on a lot by lot basis.
Back to maybe the CAO. So going to like Lockwood subdivision or Meadow, no, that's Meadowlands. So, or the other one, I can't remember the name. I want to say Charlotte, but I don't know if that's right or not. Are there provisions that are already in those done to 2 or to 1.5 or to 3, or do we know? Will it impact the way that they are able to develop, or they're approved subdivisions, so it will not impact those?
So as part of the provision within there, they would have to meet the current zoning bylaw, whatever that zoning bylaw is at the time when they start to develop. But one thing that I can certainly indicate is that the last 2 subdivisions with respect to Meadowlands in the village of Cardinal and Flat Street both have that 1.5. Separation, just as you know, as an example.
If my question, I guess, would be if we switched this today to 3, the impact that it could have on the extensive work that's been done at say Meadowlands to increase the density to try to create affordable housing might actually remove the ability to create some of those units.
Well, with all due respect, Mr. Chair, I don't agree with that, because if the developer knows up front that he's got to meet the 3 meter standard and he wants to build a 3,000 square foot house, all he has to do is go deeper on the lot, not wider, just go deeper. He just adjusts, all he has to do is adjust his footprint.
So my question back to the CAO. Would it have an impact or potentially have an impact on that subdivision?
Well, certainly the developer would need to adjust accordingly. If the adjustments been made from 1.5 to 3 meters, then the developer is going to need to meet that 3 meter setback. Like at the point when they start to build.
So the standard they were built in before was 1.5 or 2?
To the chair, the current zoning bylaw in the residential second density zone, the main building interior is 1.5 and accessory building is 1.5. In the residential first density zone, the current standard for interior and setback is 2 meters and accessory building is still 1.5. So for most of the lots, the standard currently is 1.5.
Okay, so somebody help me get where I need to be here.
Can I just say one more thing on that, just to help bring some clarity to that discussion? From a developer's point of view, when they look to do a development in an urban area, they might consider what their standards are, but they might also expect to apply for their own standards that they want, which gives you the opportunity to review that and decide on it. And sometimes with applications for subdivision, if they haven't designed it to meet your standards, and the zoning isn't already in place, they're going to apply for a zoning bylaw amendment, in which case they will request whatever standards they want that they're designing to. So in the case of the lot masters, I'm not sure, the zoning R2?
R1.
R1, so that they may, I don't know what their detailed design looks like, because I don't think they're there yet in terms of what their requests for side yards are going to be. But it may, this discussion may not be relevant at this point, because they're going to have to decide for themselves what they want and make an amendment to achieve that, or comply with whatever's in place at the time. But as Mr. Kent said, the zoning in place at the time of building permit will dictate.
What, just maybe one comment from the chair position. So going, I mean, the idea of moving development lines out further to the 1.5, not the 3, would result in theory an intensification. Is that a fair statement?
It allows for more compact development.
So the whole idea behind Bill, I believe it's 108, which allows secondary dwellings and granny suites, is again to add intensification. Correct? Like affordable housing intensification. So by us shrinking the ability, are we not doing the opposite of what that was asking? We're not reducing our ability to intensify?
No, I think what your standards are doing are telling the development community what you want your developments to look like. You want it to be compact, and you want it to achieve a certain streetscape. We have provisions in the zoning bylaw that allow for second units, whether they're internal to a dwelling or they are internal to a detached dwelling. Just because those are there, though, it doesn't mean that every lot will accommodate that. So in the case of an urban lot that's got 15 meters of frontage, that lot is going to be able to support a house, but whether or not you have a 1.5 meter side yard or a 3 meter side yard doesn't have any bearing really on the accessory buildings, because those are governed by another standard in the zoning bylaw.
Like maximum lot coverage?
That's one of them, but also the accessory use provisions that speak to accessory buildings, and where they have a different yard setback. They're often as little as 1 meter. And you also have the second unit provisions that govern the placement of second dwellings on a property.
Plus parking.
And there's parking considerations. So there's a lot of factors that go into what can be developed on a lot. It's not just 1 or 2 standards. It's the lot coverage, the parking, the side yards, the lot coverage, the shape of the lot, all sorts of different things. So I think the question for yourselves is do you want a standard that is a typical urban standard, or do you want one that you feel like you've provided some bigger spaces for your community to use as part of their developments?
Mr. Mayor?
In some ways, this discussion is really not germane to the issue, to the reality in which we live. What we're talking about here is horses and cats. When you're talking about new lots and you set a standard, the developer knows what the standard is, and he can come and ask relief from the standard before he starts his development. What we're really talking about here is what happens in places like Cardinal, Johnstown, and Spencerville, which the houses have been built fair distances, I'm going to say, from the lot lines. And what we get faced with is there's a fire on a lot, and that house is destroyed, and along comes a developer, and he wants to squeeze in a new building as happened in East Street in Cardinal,
Yes.
was to squeeze in a new building and put it 1.5 meters from the lot line. And that new building is just plain too tight for the neighborhood, really, when it comes right down to it, doesn't fit the neighborhood. Now, aside from that, it creates all kinds of access issues to the eaves. I know what Councillor Cameron is saying, you can always get access to the roof, but you can't get access from under to the eaves. If you've got a 18-inch overhang on an eave and a 1.5 meter setback, the ladder is almost perpendicular. You can't go on the other guy's lot if he tells you to stay off, whether he's got a fence there or not. So you're really just talking about what standard is going to prevail here in the new subdivisions. And to my mind, make it 3 and let the developer work with it.
I can see people wanting 3 meters there, but I think we're kind of coming late to the table after we've already went through changes for the Lockwood subdivision to increase it up. And there's no way, the way those lots are laid out, if all of a sudden you add another 10 feet onto every lot that he's got to have there going to build on, he's not going to get 149 units in there. It's going to have to go back down the price house for
Even with the size of the zone.
no way when they're crowded in that tight. You take 10 feet off every lot. That's not just 5 feet on one side, you're taking 10 feet that you can't build on. Now off, what was it, 12 lots in a row. There, that's 120 feet now that he's lost to build on. That's 2 lots.
Yeah, but we allowed him to build a fourplex on those lots.
That was still, now he won't get a fourplex in there because he's got to take that 10 feet off. Gonna be a 3-plex now. But all the depth, when you look at all the lots, all his depth was right to the minimum for the depth to back up against each other to get the roads.
He can come back, but we've already said.
That's money.
But again, I mean, in a pro development, you don't want them coming back every time they want to build to ask to allow to do it. Otherwise, they're going to build somewhere else that has 1.5.
We're walk away. So
We're either yeah, like every single time a builder wants to build, they have to come for an amendment build. Like,
Yeah, that's.
right. I mean, you're also setting a document that's going to be used for 10 years. It's not like it's this year. It's going to be to pair up to our official plan that's going to be used and utilized for the next 10 years. We're looking for 10 years worth of development. But those around us have those guidelines of 1.5, and we're the ones at 3. Yes.
I mean, that is a guideline. I mean, we've already said, and I think we've demonstrated, my experience on this committee in the last 4 years has demonstrated that, you come here with a reasonable request and we're not giving it a lot of pushback, generally speaking, if it's reasonable, and we can go from there. So in a condensed situation like these 2 subdivisions, and I would have thought they would have been grandfathered in already once we adapt this, but if not, conversation to move those to 1.5, because that is what that subdivision is basically built on that assumption, that whatever, right?
Mhm.
But for infill down the road, I think we've also learned that not having a say really does create a really bad product, and I don't want to avoid that kind of thing from happening again.
Chairman, I'd like to move a motion that the side yard setbacks on what page, whatever it was, be set at 2 meters.
Set at 2 for full service.
I don't even know what page we're on.
Page 79, Mr. Mayor,
So from
149. Oh, you'd be page 45, Mr. Mayor.
So from 1.5 to 1.5, it's page 47.
Take out the 1.5 and replace it with 2.
47.
And leave 3 in there.
Leave 3 for the partial services, for the full services go to 2. So we have a mover to move the 1.5 to 2. Does he have a second? He has a seconder in Cody. Does anyone else have any further comments? Nobody else has any further comments. I am going to call a question. All in favor for the 2 meter, 1.5 to be changed to 2 meters? Opposed? 1, 2 opposed. Oh, change it. 2 meters. Okay, further questions?
I
Let's
have
get her,
none.
let's get her going.
No.
Done?
I have none.
Mr. Mayor.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think I should go last. I've got about 6
Mr. Hunter?
tabs here.
I have one.
Sorry,
Okay,
Councilor
under
Hunter.
the agricultural zone, I don't see the rationalization for automatically taking out on-farm diversification.
Page referenced.
That's page 83, I guess, on yours.
83 of 149.
In an agricultural zone, the only thing being diversified is agriculture. Carry on, you gotta come and apply for a zoning bylaw every time an agriculture operating.
Just what, do you know exactly the page that we're talking about? Do you have it in exactly in front of you? Because in mine, it's not.
Oh, it's, okay, it's 117. 117 of the package.
117.
Yes.
So 83 of the document. Yes.
83 of the document, correct.
Okay. Did you want to comment back on the councilor's concern first? Or did you?
I think what I heard, sorry,
Go ahead.
I think what I heard is the council didn't like the removal of the on-farm diversified use from the rural and agricultural zone as of right uses. The reason we've chosen to do that is we feel that we ought to include more control and guidance and regulation over what an on-farm diversified use, how it should be controlled. For example, on-farm diversified uses are normally intended to be a small portion of an agricultural operation or on an agricultural property. And in the absence of having a set of use-specific standards for that use, it's currently left to too much subjectivity. So we felt that until we have that clearly articulated in the bylaw, we'll take it out and treat them on a one-off basis. But our intention would be to develop those standards and add them in through an amendment down the road sometime. Just as we were instructed to look at short-term dwellings, or sort of short-term accommodations. In the absence of having something to put in there, we didn't want to, we said we'd come back with a better answer. And so we felt that was the proper way of dealing with the on-farm diversified uses as well.
I'm sorry, but I don't see the point here. We've been trying in this council to cut out red tape and try to get development going. And to me, and no offense to you, but this is just creating a lot more red tape for ones that want to add work in the township, and creating more work for you as planners to come up with more things that we got hoops that's got to be jumped through to, you know. We haven't had any trouble in this township with diversification on farms. In all the years I've sat on council, I haven't heard any complaints from any of the diversifications, like Connor's dad added a bio digester up there, but nothing but good. We've had people just over the border onto the farm to produce cheese and actually saying we've had honey producers add small stores and process on to do. Nobody's complaining about us. Why do we all of a sudden want to start adding a whole bunch of red tape? I think it's just, I'm sorry, but I think it just creates more work for planners and lawyers. So
what would you like to see done with it,
I'd
Councilor?
just like to see it just left as it is, on farm diversification, uses allowed. So They gotta come and ask for anything that gotta be done, they gotta come and ask for building permits and stuff anyways. They gotta meet sewer health regulations and one thing and another, anything there, so the township has a say in anything that's built, so.
So Connor, do you want?
I would, I agree with most of what Councilor is saying, and I have a solution that I could propose, which could just take the definition of on-farm diversified use and tie it in with agricultural use. You can't really make a comprehensive list of all the things involved in agriculture and then limit it.
Change every day.
And if I may, we should look at residential second density and third density if we're going to make a change to first density.
We're talking about on-farm diversified.
I wanted to put a bookmark there. That's why I was pushing back against it initially.
We'll get back to you for that. Let's keep it at on-farm diversified. So, Greg?
Can I just get an example of what you're thinking you're trying to prevent and what would be allowed, like if we didn't change it, what could happen? And if we take it out, what are we trying to prevent? For just, a simple example, sorry, so I can understand.
Maybe Jordan and I can tag team this answer. On-farm diversified use is not a term that we've made up, but rather it's a term that is specifically defined in the provincial policy statement that is different than an agricultural use and different from an agricultural related use. And all three of those are permitted in agricultural areas. And the guidance from the Ministry of Agriculture is for on-farm diversified uses, you should have specific zoning provisions that control the type of size and scale of an on-farm diversified use, because they're not necessarily related to agriculture, but because they're in an agricultural designation, they have to be small so that they don't grow to be too big. For example, a wedding venue. A wedding venue is an example where someone might want to have that on their agricultural property, but it's not related to agriculture. But it could be if it was scaled to the size of however we define on-farm diversified uses. So that's just an example. Others might be like a little like a winery. Might be an example. Even if you're not growing the grapes, you might have a small restaurant or a small operation that you can serve the public. It wouldn't ordinarily be allowed in an agricultural designation, but if you treat it as an on-farm diversified use, it could be, but it has to be small, usually related to a percentage of the property area, standards about how big the buildings are, those sorts of things. So it's we're not trying to make red tape for anybody. We're trying to control so we don't have to be in a situation where someone applies for an on-farm diversified use and we're scratching our head thinking, what the hell is that? Does it qualify? Does it not qualify? We want to.
Second, and then the key thing too with on-farm diversified use is the principal use has to clearly be agricultural related. So if someone, let's say, has an agricultural zone, you don't want to treat the permission of an on-farm diversified use to establish, let's say, a wedding venue as an example, whereas there isn't even an agricultural use established on that property.
Yeah, primary use has to still be agriculture. So that's the basis for it, but it's provincially driven. We want to make sure we treat it with respect to the guidelines that the ministry has set out.
Thank you.
Did you want to comment before I ask Councilor Hamilton?
Well, I think it was just I sort of sided with Councilor Hunter on if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but I can understand how somebody could come down the road and try and manipulate the rules. So, what I thought was going to be a genius idea you've already touched on is that why wouldn't you then put a percentage to it in the definition to say a maximum of a percentage, whatever it seems reasonable, whatever most people are doing, to try and allow for that, because it is a big part of our community, right? you know, when you have somebody who, you know, makes honey or maple syrup along the way, while doing other stuff on their property, it's a benefit to the community. So I would see us further down that.
Did you have any interest in moving a motion to put that back in? I'm getting the sense that you did,
I
so,
certainly do have a motion. Move the motion, to leave it in there.
okay, so that it be added back or it be left as it was, like not redlined and struck it, right? Okay, so Councillor Hunt would like to see that, he's moving a motion to have that, see that left in. Does he have a seconder?
He does.
He's Councillor Cameron. Does anyone else have any comments to that, Mr. Mayor? Do you want to-
Quick question.
Yeah.
If it's left in as a permitted use, as of right permitted use, is it still controlled by a site plan agreement amendment, a site plan agreement? It's not, eh?
No.
It's just an as of right.
As of right.
Okay, all right.
And so the question then comes to the building permit stage.
Yep, and doesn't come to council, doesn't rise to
Comes
this
to council,
committee.
The building official will have to interpret whether or not what's being proposed is falls under the definition. And the definition is pretty broad.
Yep.
And we're just suggesting that some use specific standards would help that building official make a judgment call that isn't gonna get him in trouble.
Okay, so I'm still speaking to the motion. So the question is, can you not develop a standard within this bylaw which would recognize it as of right usage, provided that the following standards are met? In other words, provide a definition right within the bylaw.
We're going to introduce a section in the bylaw under use specific provisions that dealt specifically with on-farm diversified uses. But we wanted to get this to you without delaying it for another month. We wanted to make sure we can keep moving forward. So that was our intention. We just didn't get there. That's all I'm
Okay,
saying.
I see the issue. I'd like to see it left, but I'd like to see it left with the definition included.
That's what we want.
Beg pardon?
That's what we'd like to be.
Okay, well, so I don't know what your time, first, my apologies, Mr. Chair, through the chair. Can we not still arrive at our goal of setting the date for the public meeting and you making that date? Of getting your standard developed by that date?
Although before we, through you, Mr. Chair, if we were to take a crack at writing standards for on-farm diversified uses before it went to a public meeting, I think it would only be fair for us to present that to you for your review and discussion before it would put out to the public. So it potentially delays our public meeting. So the schedule is at your will, but that we just felt it's important to keep moving here.
If I may, so if it went back in as a permitted use, could an amendment be added that defined what those permitted uses were as diversified? Like sort of the opposite way that so we're prohibiting everything and then allowing it back in. Can we allow it and then?
That's what we just talked about.
Maybe I misunderstood that.
We're, the
I
motion,
think this disallows everything.
the motion is to leave on-farm diversified uses in as of right uses.
Right.
The options are to just leave it there and do an amendment at some point in the future. It could be after this bylaw is adopted and just fix it then, or it could be done before it gets approved.
Okay.
But if we're trying to get this thing done, we just have to know what our time is so that we can.
Okay, so there's a motion on the floor. It's been seconded. Are there any further comments?
I mean, I would like to see, and I don't know why it isn't as simple as a percentage of you know, volume of the land, to put that in place just in case we have somebody who has to do it down the road, you know, so that at least then it goes back to us to have this discussion and say, oh, we're okay with it going a little bit above that point that we justify the stake in the line in the sand that we draw now to say that's where we get concerned.
Any further? Councilor Hunt?
Well, you want to define what on-farm diversification use is, to me, on a kind of simple way is just put on-farm diversification related to agriculture. And there, if you, nobody's going to be able to sit down and draw up a schedule and list every possible thing or the way technology is moving, that's going to be a diversification for on-farm. You can rule out, okay, a wedding venue or something like that. You're gonna put 15 things in there, cheese factory, one thing never in here now. 5 years down the road, there's gonna be 10 other things that comes up that is a diversification that could be done in there, so.
Tractor assembly plant though, right?
It could be anything.
Tractor assembly plant is media, it's not agricultural, mind you, but you know, it is.
Well, it is agricultural.
It is agricultural use.
For dairy factories and stuff, so.
Okay, so do you want to amend your motion or do you want to leave?
No, I just want to leave it as it is. We've got two. That's been in there for at least two zoning bylaws that I've been involved in. We've never had any trouble with it, so I don't know why we're looking to for trouble that's not there.
Yeah, okay, so then,
I just have a question for have we had any issues with this? Councilor Hunter is saying no, but before we vote, has the staff had any issues brought to their attention for this?
Well, no, right off the top of my head, I'm not sure. If I can recall.
Oh, come on.
fair enough.
No,
Okay, so,
I think we should deal with it.
so let's move on.
But are we gonna rewrite that to say for agricultural?
so
No, he didn't want to, he didn't want to modify it.
through the chair, I think the simplest one is to vote on the motion, whether you're
Yes, let's move on.
and move forward.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so the motion would be to leave the term as on-farm diversified use. Leave it in as a permitted use. So I'm gonna call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're opposed?
You wanted it in. You wanted it left in.
Yeah.
That's what your
Okay.
motion is.
You're opposed?
Yeah.
So one opposed, everybody else for, so switch that back to it. Yeah. Okay, where are we?
2 and 3.
R2 and 3 were, sorry, what was the,
Well, through the chair, we just changed residential first density from 1.5 meters or 3 meters to 2 meters, but the same line is in R2 and R3, and it would make sense to do all three or none, in my opinion.
Page reference.
81 of 149 and 83 of 149. Interior side, full or partial service.
what were they before? Were they 2 meters before, or were they 1.5 before? For R2 and R3? Have they been
Yeah,
changed
R2 is 1.5 meters.
currently, or?
Yes.
On R3, over 3 meters is taken out. Or is suggested to be taken out. And leave 1.5. That's on page 83. And if you go to page 81, R2, it is the same. It's 1.5 or 3. Just as the other ones.
So I'm looking at that. Connor, you want that switched to what? You
Well,
want that 1.5 to change to a 2?
I'd almost like to propose changing R1 back Because I think it would undo a headache we've just created, and that's why I was pushing back from it initially, unfortunately, is because there's a lot of moving parts if you open that up.
I mean, R1 is designed more for single family, sorry, through the chair. Is designed more for the single dwelling, and the R2 and 3 are furthermore condensed. That's the intent of those. So, you know, where they're different, and I'm okay with them being different, honestly. I think that's where, you know, that I was trying to say the R1, you know, you want to have a little more space between these houses, and that's where I was pushing for that one. Hadn't considered this one here, but I'd still be okay with 1.5 there, although, you know, if you did have a, you know, a tiny home in the backyard, good luck moving a fridge or a stone past there if there's an electrical box on that wall. But anyways, that's what we talked about already, and that's fine. You know, that's not an issue.
Further discussion? Okay, Connor, do you have other questions or anything you want to move forward? Not getting any update?
No, I don't contribute a lot, but I sure know how to slow things down. I don't have an opinion either way. I just wanted to bring it up because there is a whiplash effect here.
Yep, so I'm just trying to move forward beyond that. So further questions to the ZBL? No,
I'm leaving it open to everyone else to figure out.
Cody?
Nope.
Nothing? All right, Mr. Mayor, you're on.
Okay, so I have several questions. First of all, on page 39 of 149, I'm talking, looking at the definition of a boarding house. I'd like to propose that the word single dwelling be left in. Looking for a seconder.
Second. Oh, I can't second. Let me check, sorry.
And I'll explain why in a minute. I've been approached by an out-of-town businessman who would like to establish a boarding house in Cardinal, a single dwelling in which the proprietor supplies for financial gain, lodging with or without meals to a maximum of 6 boarders. But he doesn't propose to live in that boarding house. That's what I'm trying to deal with here. So I would hope that the word single would go back in, because I don't want to see the boarding house include not only the front building, but the side building at the back end as well. So I'm looking for a seconder to put the single word back in.
So seconder for that? Yes. Chris? Chris, the word seconds. Okay, further conversation as to putting the word single back in.
In this case that the mayor just mentioned, they would still be limited at 3 boarders according to this definition, would they not be?
I'll deal with that in a minute.
The word single first, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, does anyone have any more issues with the word single? So let's call a question on the word single.
May we have comment from the planners on this before we decide? What would the implications be?
Through the chair?
The word single is not meant to be one dwelling. It's meant a single dwelling as in a dwelling, just to be clear. I think I heard you say you didn't want a second dwelling on the property. The way single is meant to apply there is a single dwelling as defined in the bylaw. Okay, we're clear there. So I originally, the way we had it drafted with the word single in there is the way we intended it to be. We took it out because we thought that was a comment we had received or some discussion, I think, somewhere we had with the staff. I don't recall, but we think it's fine to leave the word single in there.
Thank you. That's my preference.
So Connor, you good?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. So then further comment on the word single. So we can have them put it back in. Everybody, there is a motion, so we need to vote, I guess.
Yep.
All in favor?
Yes.
Looks like it carries. Does it carry, Mr. Chair?
I'm trying to see who's voting and who's not. There's still conversation going on. So all in favor? So unanimous. Okay, so second
Second issue, and through the chair to the planner, was there any rationale for a maximum of 3 borders, considering the request that I have for a maximum of 6 borders?
What I just might add, typically if you have borders and you don't have public transit in your township, you might want to assume.
No, this is a private individual, he'll supply transportation.
That's, you're asking one of the, what the rationale is for 3 borders. One of them is when you think of the borders, you might assume they all have their own vehicle and where you're gonna accommodate the parking on the property.
Ah, I see your point. Yeah. And so that's an interesting point, Mr. Chairman. I don't know how to deal with it. The individual approached me about 3 months ago, hasn't come back since. Let's move on. And we'll see what happens. I'm going now then to page. This is on page 43 of 149. On page 43 of 149, I have a definition. I don't have a definition for additional dwelling unit. Page 43 is one of the pages of definitions, and so missing is the definition of additional dwelling unit. And I see that on page, I think it's 45, there's a reference to, yes, looking at page 61, there's a reference at the bottom of page 61 under barrier-free parking space requirements. There's a reference to additional residential unit. But additional residential unit is not defined in the definitions, although it appears to be defined on page 70 of 149. My question is, should it not appear in the definitions in order to be congruent with official plan amendment number 2 that was passed by the counties, where we agreed to a commonality of terms on our various terms? So through the chair to the planner, I'm just looking for commonality with the county official plan amendment number 2.
I don't think we need a definition for additional residential units. The way the provision is written, it talks about additional dwelling units as being either second dwelling units or second dwellings, both of which are already defined. So I think we don't need a definition for additional residential units. And it's written to implement the county's OPA. And we've also drafted the local township draft official plan amendment that we would be sharing with the county for pre-consultation purposes so that we get their input on. So in short, I think the way it's drafted will meet county requirements.
Yes, but to my mind, they don't meet the requirements of page 61 of 141 of 149, because on page 61 of 149, where we talk about barrier-free parking space requirements, we say included in the number of parking spaces by section 3.14.1, except for parking required for an additional residential unit. So we use the term, and now the proponent says, well, you don't define what an additional residential unit is any place. So I'm going to leave that sit, Mr. Chairman. I don't want to be here all night. We've got an in-camera session coming. I'll leave that thing. I've got on-farm diversified use. We beat that one to pieces. I won't go there.
Thank you.
And that's that one. And I think I got just one more. Let's see whether we've beaten this one to death as well. I'll drop this one. So I'm leaving one Chad hanging. one issue hanging for the planners. To my mind, I really feel, because the counties makes it clear that the term that we will use is not secondary dwelling, it's not granny suites, it's not 100 other names, it's to be called additional residential unit. To make that clear. Over to you.
Understood, and like I said, we have drafted the official plan amendment that we will be sharing with the counties for their input and comment before we advertise for a public meeting. And we will also, in the amendment that we have, bylaw amendment is intended to implement that. So we'll make sure it all works in conjunction with the county.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
All right, so I think we made it through that discussion and so, okay, so if I am correct, Wendy, I felt coordinator, my recommendation would be it's recommended that committee endorse the revisions presented in the second draft of the comprehensive zoning bylaw and proceed with scheduling a future public meeting. Correct?
Sounds great to me.
Great, so do we need to endorse the revision? Do we need to change that at all so that it recognizes that it's going to be slightly different than what the draft is? Because we've asked for a few minor changes.
I don't know, to the clerk, or how does that read?
So through the chair, you could say something very similar, that is recommended that committee endorse the revisions as presented, as well as additional amendments made by committee. And that would incorporate all the decisions that were made at the committee level, however, it hasn't been finalized at the council level at this point.
Right, so as presented, and then sorry, with revisions, as presented with
the amendments that were
with the
made at the committee level.
committee changes with approved committee.
As committee, okay. Recommend that the committee endorse the revisions presented, as well as the approved committee amendments in the second draft of the comprehensive zoning bylaw and proceed with scheduling a future public meeting.
Good, good. And I don't have that wording that you do. So I need someone to move that as the clerk stated. Mr. Maunder, seconded by Cody Otway. All in favor? All any opposed? None opposed? We're good to go. Okay. Yay. Do we need, does that mean we need to set the date then now as well? Or do you set the date, or we've just given approval to set the date? Yes.
Yeah, we would like to set a date. The other thing though, I wanted to just make sure that Jordan and I have direction on is, we heard the presentation from the delegate earlier today, and they had raised a bunch of questions and comments, and we're not sure what direction to take from that. That potentially is a long discussion.
I think you clearly defined exactly what a RSL intention was. You want to comment further?
Well, you know, with all due respect to the presenters, and I give Mr. Davies and Suzanne full credit for the amount of work that they did in analyzing what was happening within that zone. but I think it's moot and beside the point. I really do. And I said that, so I'm not saying anything here that I didn't say in front of them. And I'm really worried because I did declare potential pecuniary interest here, but my feeling is that the planners are on solid ground here. And to me, the solid ground is that the corporation cannot and does not want to send any wrong signals. We are not about to get involved in changing some of those existing right-of-ways up to the standard, a municipal standard. That is the whole point of those limited services zones. We're not sending garbage trucks down those roads. We're not sending snowplows down the roads. In a pinch, I guess we'll send the fire truck down. We're not sending the snowplow.
And I think, you know, one of the notes that I had, or at least seemed like one of their goals was clarification of of exactly the intention of the RSL zone. You certainly defined, you know, the intention of it well. Do we want that, or is that in the actual document?
Well, that's the question for Mr. Pence. I mean, do you think we've identified that strongly enough? That's our intent, and maybe that's not a zoning intent. Maybe that's a political intent that doesn't come into a zoning bylaw. I don't know, but to me, it's clear.
Well, the zoning intent is to identify the properties that are accessed by a private road to be zoned RLS.
That's written very clearly in the bylaw now.
Some zoning bylaw structures, for every zone category, there is an intent of what that zone is intended for. This bylaw doesn't take that structure. It's meant to be more simple instead of having that level of complexity. So it's not spelled out that way. You know, personally, when listening to their presentation, I appreciate all the work they put into, but I think they, in some ways, they combine a lot of different ideas, and I think a lot of those ideas were somehow mixed together that confused planners a little bit. In my mind, the structure of the use of the RLS, all that, it works. It's internally consistent, I think. So I don't think much needs, and if anything needs to be done to address those comments, but I guess we could proceed with the public meeting and see what comments come further. Like I said earlier, there's still opportunity to revise the bylaw afterwards. It's not like it's going to be adopted at that public meeting.
Right. Okay, so what exactly do you need from us?
I just wanted to know, or we wanted to know whether or not anything as a result of that delegation, if you want us to do anything with it.
Don't get the general sense that there is the will at the table.
Not what to do with it.
I think they want to see what the public feedback is as the document is now.
Okay.
And then we'll make, if we get, you know, ask for revisions and clarifications, then we'll revisit it after the public meeting.
Okay.
Okay, so setting a date, are we setting a date tonight? Do we do that or no?
Through the chair, I don't mind setting a date later, or we could set a date here at this meeting. I'm hoping the clerk of the CIO can help me here. I know that the committee has the authority from council to schedule a public meeting under the Planning Act, but I don't know if we need the revisions that were proposed to be approved by council before we go ahead and do that. And that was just at the time.
Through the chair, most of the time we have not brought these type of revisions back to council. It is incorporated into the next draft, and then the committee again reviews it. Unless there is a major objector and it's a hot topic, we have not. So I don't feel that has happened this evening,
No.
under my understanding.
It's all peanut stuff.
Yeah, they're all little things. Okay, so let's set a date then. That was the goal, right?
Get this thing over the finish line, come
I'm waiting for the coordinator to pick the date for us with the planner.
I'm wondering if we should set the date soon after we can talk about how long it will take to have the revisions and prepare a public notice, and then we 21 days notice, and we should advertise in the newspaper.
So if the committee is okay with it, I will leave the date in the hands of the development coordinator, and she'll get back to us with that date.
So be it.
Okay, good. Done. All right, so now, number 3. 6.3. If you will. Coordinator, just give us a quick, we're only, the intention of this, if I'm correct, is only to schedule a public meeting date as well.
I can, yes, through the chair, we have an application for a zoning amendment. 112-114 Dobie Road. The applicant is Xander Plan on behalf of the owners JF Dobie and Sons Limited. So you might remember this from last year. Committee and council recommended in favor of 2 applications for severances, B47 and B4821. And one of the conditions we asked for on severance was that the applicant obtain a zoning amendment. And this is just, the request is just to allow staff to set a public meeting date for the zoning amendment. Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah. So the recommendation is that it is recommended that the township proceed with scheduling the public meeting date for the application filed at the lands 112-114 Dobie Road. It is important that the public meeting date be scheduled to ensure that the applicant can clear conditions of consent relating to the zoning amendment requirement prior to elapsing time. So again, we would leave that date in your hands. I'm the assumption we're just approving that you go ahead and make whatever. So I need a mover. Moved by Councillor Hunter, seconded by Mr. Modler. Any comments?
Safe home, safe home.
Just one minute, Mr. Chairman, there's also a recommendation on page 140, which is our own recommendation. And that didn't sound like the one that you just read.
I thought I had that one.
You read no text on it.
Yeah, I think so too.
You read no text.
Oh, sorry.
Through the chair.
That's the motion that's on the floor, Mr. Chair.
And I don't think that it really has any effect on exactly what I said, right? No, it's perfectly fine. So it's been moved, it's been seconded. Councilor Cameron, comments noted. Thanks for pointing it out. Any further comments? Hearing none, calling the question, all in favor?
Aye.
Unanimous to proceed to a date. And a update for vacant and abandoned buildings. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, will the CAO speak to this?
Mr. Chair, I would just sort of ask committee to sort of receive that, this is information.
Okay.
So moved.
Good. So information only as a request at a previous meeting for an update on those buildings and how things are proceeding with those buildings. Good, so everybody has that report. It's here. Moving on to item 6AB under effective, there's nothing under play in the recreation department. I believe the development coordinator has some good news about trade show and maybe free trade.
Through the chair, I just wanted to provide a memo from the Conservation Authority. We actually received this in January about Free Tree Day. So we don't have a date yet or any additional information other than what is here in the Conservation Authority's memo. That's on the very last page, page 149 of your agenda package. Sad news is that there aren't a lot of seedlings available this year. So whereas in the past, the Conservation Authority would provide $500 worth of seedlings, and the township could also buy in and double that with more seedlings, that they're just not available this year. So it's going to be a smaller Free Tree Day, but the format would be the same. At least that is the intention. It was very successful, ran so smoothly last year. So we would do the same this year. We don't have a date yet. We don't know when we'll have the seedling, so not appropriate to set a date yet.
And is there anything else?
No.
Trade show at the end of the month?
Yeah, well, we've got the small business and trade show we talked about at our last meeting. It's on March 24th to 26th. Kind of a fun spin on it. We're kind of giving the platform back to our local businesses. So I think I've shared this with all of you here as well, and please help me in reaching out to the businesses. They have promotional materials, an event coming up, they have a coupon they want to share, if they just want to share a business card, or they need employees and they want to put a job application in there. I want to gather like a swag bag or a bag of promotional materials from our local businesses that we can pass out at the trade show. Other than that, I want to advertise the website, and I've got some cool plans to do that. And I know Mr. Spencer has been working to order the golf shirts and sweaters that were requested. So I'm looking forward to the trade show.
I think it's going to be a very busy, well-attended weekend. I think people are looking forward to getting it. So yeah, let's hope for good weather. Okay, so I think that gets us through.
So yeah, just a question with regard to that through the chair.
Yes.
So I've had 2 inquiries as a result of the notice that went out to supply 500 copies. And so I have a business that's interested in providing about a 3 or 4 page document about his business, 2 of them as a matter of fact. Now, they're interested in how these documents are going to be used. Are they going to be a handout document over the table? Or are they just going to be put in a bag and the bag gets handed out?
Put in a bag and the bag's handed out.
Okay, they're not interested in that approach, so they just need to know that.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to item 7, to inquiries and notices of motion. Does anyone have any inquiry or notice of motion?
Just more of an inquiry, just I guess with regards to Tree Day and the trade show. Did you get the volunteers? You have the volunteers for that, or is that worked okay for you? And I guess question for the chair.
Sure.
Through the chair, I don't have concerns about the trade show. I think 3 members of the committee have signed up with some times to volunteer, but I know there is intention from others to join as well, and the date is still a little ways away, so we may not even be scheduled yet. I intend to be there, so don't worry, we're covered. But please reach out and let me know if you plan to come, and I'll just, maybe that's when I will go home and take a break or something, right? We've got enough coverage, so I'm covered. And pre-tree day, the recreation team has always been able to help with that. We've got it running so smoothly, and I'm not worried about it.
Good. Anyone else?
Inquiries.
Yes.
Inquiries through the chair, if I may. Any word or contact or developments from Terpene Farms?
No.
Second question, Mr. Chair, through you again. Any contact or moving forward on Lockmaster subdivision?
Yes, through the chair, the draft conditions. Oh, I'm sorry, I might have to get back to you on this. I know the draft conditions are in the hands of the developer, and I'm not sure if he has provided comments or said he was okay with the recommended changes yet. Right now, I think the conversations are between the council and the developer.
And is there any effort or movement to develop a subdivision agreement? The written agreement?
Through the chair, no, not at this time. I think it is appropriate to wait until we have some of those plans, like the stormwater management plan, at least in the final stages of approval, but at this stage we haven't seen them yet, and those are going to help form part of the subdivision agreement. So I don't think we're ready to start that yet.
Also through the chair, I see there's a reference in the vacant and abandoned building bylaw report to some development at the corner of James and East Street. Is that going to happen in the next 3 to 4 months? I'm trying to remember what the report said, but I don't think the report gave us. Anyway, what's happening at James and East Street?
So through the chair, there.
James and New, sorry.
The chair, at this time, there is no timetable established as of yet.
Okay, the report says they're in the process of obtaining a severance. Have they actually applied to the county for a severance yet?
Through the chair, we haven't received an application from the county. It might be in the, it might be in the county's hands, and it could be in the mail. I know we've worked with them on a pre-consultation for their application, and I think they have all the information they need from the township, and my understanding is they were well on their way to submit an application.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Good. All right, so there's no further inquiries and notices of motion. Good, we're into question period. There's nobody online, there's nobody in house, so no questions. And we will be moving to a closed session. I saw Councillor Hunter walking around. Do you have a motion to move into closed session?
Member myself, second by Councillor Cameron. The committee proceeding in closed session at 9:16 in order to address a matter pertaining to one, section 239(2)B, personnel matters by an identified individual, including municipal or local board employees, specifically public works, and number 2, section 239(2)C, proposed or pending acquisition or disposal of land by the municipality or local board, specifically job site challenge.
So before I call the question on this, I just want to point out for the record that due to the identifiable individual portion of it, the sensitivity of that matter, that committee members will be excused from the closed session, and will only be council members that will be involved in the closed session. So motion is on the floor, moved by Councillor Hunter, seconded by Councillor Cameron. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None, moved, carried. And so a couple minute break, sorry, 5 minute break while we clear chamber. Thank you.
Member myself, second by Councillor Cameron. At the closed meeting, the committee does now adjourn and the open meeting does now resume at 9:38 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So reporting out of our closed session, council discussed personnel matters about an identifiable individual, specifically Public Works. And we also discussed proposing or pending acquisition of land, specifically job site challenge. We have been moved by Councillor Hunter, seconded by Councillor Cameron, that the closed meeting of committee does now adjourn and the open meeting does now resume. Do I have to call that question? Have to call that question, all right? All in favor? And then the last one would be adjournment. So
Moved by myself and seconded by Kemp. You got it.
you have it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Moved by myself, seconded by Councilor Cameron, that the committee now adjourns at 9:39 p.m.
Favor?
Aye. And there you go.
We're done.
Thank you.